welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am your host, Jessica, and I am really excited to have an author here who has written so many books that people love and are going to love this one as well. Please introduce yourself, tell everybody who you are, and let's talk about your newest book, Cleopatra.
Hi everyone, I'm Saara El-Arifi, author of many books. Most recently the Feybound trilogy, and before that the Ending Fire trilogy, and then coming up is Cleopatra, which is very very exciting. Coming up in a couple of weeks. I can't believe it.
Yeah, for sure. And I thought it was really exciting when I saw that you were writing a historical fiction book about Cleopatra. One of the things I would love to know is what made you decide you wanted to sort of pivot to this particular story?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for a really long time, I've been obsessed with Cleopatra. Uh, from honestly being a kid, I just remember she was just so fascinating to me. I think there was something about um, I felt a connection with her. She was the only, I guess, non-Western queen that we really learned about. So in the British curriculum, you're taught the Tudors, the Victorians, Elizabethans. And then we always go to America and we learn about the Wild West as well. That's like really big and important. But not so much, African countries. And so when we did do Egypt, I remember being really fascinated by Cleopatra. And fast forward a few decades, and I started doing I had sold my debut book, and I decided, oh, I've got some extra time because I'd quit full-time work. I'd become a full-time writer. And this was before I was doing multiple books a year. And I was like, I'm going to do a master's degree in African studies. This was something that I'd thought about on and off for a really long time. And one of the things that kind of brought me to that conclusion was my curiosity around Cleopatra. There was so much I didn't know about her, but at the same time, I just had this really strange affinity to her. I felt like I knew her, even though I knew nothing. And so yeah, I went back to university, the oldest student there. That was fine. It was fine. And kind of concentrated my dissertation on Cleopatra. So my dissertation was all about how black women have an affinity to Cleopatra. So yeah, that was one of the main things that drew me back to her.
So, first of all, I mean, Cleopatra is sort of one of those enigmatic figures who, yeah, you're right. It's so funny that you learn about the Wild West there.
I know, I
I
know.
know, right? Because, like, to me, like, I couldn't wait to learn about other things. I'm
Yeah.
like, can we not? Like, can we move past American expansionism and all of that? But yeah, no, for sure. I totally get the just sort of the interest and so many, Cleopatra was written about by Shakespeare, and Cleopatra has been portrayed by famously Elizabeth Taylor, who would not have looked anything like Cleopatra, whole other story altogether.
Yeah.
Yeah, old Hollywood. But you really aimed to, with this book, it seems like you really aimed to just sort of like get under her skin and tell her story, find a voice for her and tell her story. I was going to ask you if it was difficult for you, but it doesn't sound like it was from your whole introduction.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I was talking about how I felt like I knew her, but actually, when I sat down and started searching the libraries, I was so shocked to realize how little we actually know about Cleopatra. I guess I was naive in the way that I thought, like, everyone's, Elizabeth Taylor played her, so we must know lots about her, right? Like Shakespeare wrote about her. And so I was so fascinated to discover everything that we truly know about Cleopatra is based 99.9% of the time on accounts that were written 150 to 250 years after she died. And that blew my mind. That is so, they didn't keep accounts like they didn't have the internet, they didn't have social media to hold like their stories. They were just using, like Plutarch admits to using his grandfather's memories. He loved court gossip, so you can tell when you read Plutarch's work, it was just see do whatever he wants kind of thing. And so we have created this mythical fact around Cleopatra. And so I guess by that point, I had decided I was going to write a fictional book around her when I was in my doing my dissertation. And I was like, oh my goodness, we actually know nothing. And so at first I was really disheartened. I was like, how am I going to find her voice when there is literally nothing? There's no written word from her. There's we have poems about her, we have propaganda, but we have nothing concrete. And what I ended up doing was like taking the tiny little elements, the archetypes that have kind of followed her, which were, witch, whore, and villain, which are the three that I just explore in the novel. But I wanted to turn it on their head. So I really was interested in her as a friend, her as a mother. We know that she had children, but no one really talks about that. You don't really you think of her as the maiden and not the mother. And yeah, so that it was the parts of her that no one had really talked about. So I just kind of prized open the silence, I guess. What a strange metaphor, but I'm going with it. And I really kind of just sat at my desk and just started talking to her and started writing. And that was, yeah, it did end up being much easier than I expected. Because I do think there's this connection that Black women generally have with a woman who's been as vilified through history as Cleopatra has.
You go into the her family, the Potomac line,
Yeah, the Ptolemaic line.
Ptolemaic
Yeah,
line. Yes, I
yeah.
completely butchered that.
No,
Sorry.
you're fine. Oh, I get everything wrong, so don't worry.
I should have known that the P is silent. I
No,
know
not
that.
always. Not
Really?
always. Yeah, and
Huh.
there is actually a school of Egyptologists who say Ptolemy. It's yeah, everything is contested because it's also gone through so many, growths of languages, and we have like the influence of Greece, and so I get everything wrong all the time. So don't
Fair,
worry.
fair, fair. No, that's no, I was it's funny because that had come up in a Terry Pratchett novel I'd read years ago,
Yeah.
where there was a joke about that. But just in general, you do talk a bit about her family and the line of succession and how she became pharaoh. Um, Now, the other thing I want to mention, and this is something that, historians have spoken about and just in general, is that the Cleopatra that you wrote about and the Cleopatra people think of as Cleopatra is not always the same, excuse me, is not the only Cleopatra in the history of ancient Egypt. How difficult is it to do that research and know generally which Cleopatra this is all being attributed to?
Oh yeah, no, near impossible. Honestly, even historians admit to the facts. Like we can see carvings and we can see her name in hieroglyphics, but there's not always a clear indication of which Cleopatra there was. So the Cleopatra that I wrote about was Cleopatra the Seventh. We don't even know who Cleopatra the Sixth was. In my novel, I incorporate it as a sister who died in the womb, um, but we actually don't know who Cleopatra the Sixth was. And everything is contested as well because this is thousands of years ago. So ultimately, I could say anything I want and call it fact because that's what Plutarch did, and he was an ancient historian that we've revered for years. But yeah, no, it is really difficult. I think the one thing that I will say about, I guess, my Cleopatra is that We know she was written about from the Roman and Greek point of view far more than her predecessors because of her entanglement with Caesar and Antonius. So yeah, that's the main thing that we have is the propaganda, and we know that that's her.
That is so interesting, but also so important, and so just sort of current, just sort of with the way that gossip works.
Yeah.
How was it for you, when you were sort of coming together with, what tense you were going to tell the story from? Like you find out that, in the she's narrating it, but she's narrating it from beyond the grave. But she's also, you're also in her head. Did you ever play with different narratives at any point, or did you always know this was going to be Cleopatra, like coming and sitting across from you at your cafe and being like, listen, like all about how I died, but nothing about how I lived?
Yeah. No, it was always going to be written like a memoir. I think I didn't even play around with tenses at all. I'm not gonna, there is some twists in this novel, which I'm not going to reveal, but it's really important that it's told as a memoir in this way. And it was the best way I could give her back her voice. She consistently her story has been taken from her and told by white men over and over and over again. And this was the best way that I could give her a little bit of truth, even though, of course, it's fiction, but there's something really beautiful about memory, and that's why I wanted it to feel like a memoir, because no one can take away your memories, right? Yet, I'm sure they'll come up with some sort of machine. Um, Maybe that's my next book. But I do think there is something really pure about memory, even though they fade and they change. It's ours, and no one can take that from us.
I was really intrigued by how well you built out, court life and political intrigue, but also, the relationship between, the Egyptians and the gods, and just sort of how, fluid it was for them. Um, did you draw on specific accounts for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was that was really hard because I'd done my dissertation. I'd done so much background research, and I was like, okay, I feel prepared. I've done my research trips. I felt prepared. I was like, I'm going to sit down and start writing. But daily life in Egypt is a totally different field. Like, I'm not an Egyptologist. I think I say that with pride in that I'm not a historian, I'm not an Egyptologist. I don't think I could have written this book if I was, because I allowed myself the freedom to get things wrong. Because when you actually sit down and you go, oh, she stood up and she picked up a candle. And you're like, hang on, did they have candles? And it's like and then she's walking along the floor on marble. And you're like, hang on, did they have marble? And yes, they had marble and they had versions of candles. And but every single thing I wrote required research. And I was not prepared for that. As someone who's come from a fantasy background, and if I was like, I remember there's a scene in a ship that I was writing and I was like, well, they don't have, they're scared of fire on the ship. So hang on, I'm just going to create an eel that lights up that lives in a tube above their head. So like I could do that in a fantasy world, but I really was creating historical fiction. And so I wanted to be as true to it as I could. And so that piece of daily life required even more research. And I actually ended up doing another course through the Oxford University with incredible Egyptologists there. So, yes, I did have to do that. And when it came to the gods, I did another specialism on the gods. And what's really difficult about ancient Egypt is that we think of ancient Egypt as homogenous, like it's just one big thing, but actually it spanned over 3,000 years. And you think about how our world has changed just in 200, 300. I say the modern world. Um, it we can say there was one God at the beginning, but then 100 years later there was a different God, and that it was really hard, I guess, to separate her era of gods. And that was another piece of research. So much research. Um, and I was lucky in that you can see where the Greek inspiration comes in, and Serapis as a god comes in. So I could pick some of those. But yes, the deities were really important research piece for me.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the even and this is, I suppose, true for just in general, deities in general. They go through different phases almost, and like
Yeah.
sometimes sometimes one god will be regarded as something, but also the inverse of something else. And
Yes.
you're like, were they always the same? Were they always connected, or were they connected because one society overtook another? That's like one of my favorite things to
Yeah.
research.
Yeah, it's honestly wild because like you'll have like Hathor who shows up as a cow, and then you'll have Isis, but that's definitely Isis because Isis has now got this crown, but she's also a cow. It's like it's wild.
It really is. Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I really enjoyed just how you made everything feel very grounded. And it's interesting when you're talking about coming from a fantasy background, because then you're building the world, whereas here you have to almost like do literary archaeology, right?
Yeah,
But also make it feel like you're there with her, make it feel like you're walking on that marble with her, and you're
yeah.
breathing the same air as her. And I can imagine, like switching gears has to be really difficult, but they both have their challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, like, actually, fantasy and historical is much closer than the genres are much closer than people think because both take you to worlds that are so different from our own. Um, and they also allow you to draw back parallels to this world. Because I think it's really interesting, the society and the culture that, even from when I started writing this book to where we are now, someone asked me the other day, how relevant do you think this book is now? And I'm like, it's so important because, um, women's rights being stripped away, our voices are still being disappearing. And I just think, oh, there's so much that I could talk about Cleopatra and how she's such an incredible conduit for the metaphors of what is happening in our current world. Um, but yeah, I think fantasy allows you to do that too because you can create these parallels and say these political statements without saying them, even though I still say them. Um, yeah, so I think the hardest bit is, as you say, the literary archaeology was what they eat and what can they smell, like, the seasons, even like just from an evolutional standpoint, the the actual weather within ancient Egypt was totally different to what it is now. It was far more humid, it was far more tropical than we could have imagined. It was much more luscious because of the Nile flooding to a huge extent across the land. So yeah, there was a lot of literary archaeology.
I think, I wanted to ask, what was like one thing, if you could pick one thing that you learned about Cleopatra the Seventh during your research, and then while you were writing this, that you feel will like stay with you forever, what would that be?
Oh, that's a good one. I think realizing that she was a scholar. And I guess saying these things also is adding with a pinch of salt because we only know what we know. And like I said, often it's been written hundreds of years after she died. But we do know that she was a scholar of some kind and she was interested in remedies and healing potions. She was a polyglot. She spoke, I say between 7 and 9 because again, contested, but 7 and 9 languages. Um, uh, she was very clearly enamored with the written word. And that, discovering that while I was sitting with all these books and drowning in research was really magical because I was like, oh wow, that another thread that drives like connects me to her. And I think I'll never that like kind of like that spark of magic will never leave me.
Well, thank you so much. Are you going to continue writing historical fiction? Are you planning a um sort of a break from that and just sticking with fantasy?
Well, I do have another novel, historical fiction novel, Queen of Sheba, which is slated for 2028. And then in the meantime, I do have another fantasy out later this year. And then what I would call my bridging fantasy, so probably somewhere between the world of Cleopatra and the world of my fantasy books. Um, and I might go back to historical, I don't know. I've got a few more books on contract, so I think I can have a play and figure out what genre next calls to me. But yeah, for me it was always going to be Cleopatra, and then Queen of Sheba started calling while I was doing Cleopatra. Her little voice was just out there going like, no one knows anything about me, and so yeah, I'm excited to write that one too.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been lovely.
Uh, Cleopatra is out. It's the end of February, correct?
Yes, I want to say 23rd.
Yes,
Yes.
24th is what it says on my
24th.
arc. But you know what's funny is that sometimes when I say that and I'll look at the side of my arc and I'll be like, "Oh, it's out in this month." The authors will be like, "Oh, no, 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 that was pushed back or they changed that." And I'm like, "I thought I had it." So I totally get
No,
that.
no, you got it right. I got it wrong.
But thank you so much,
Thank you.
Saara El-Arifi. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for writing, and we hope to have you back sometime soon.
Thank you so much, Jessica.
This was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. My guest today was,
Saara El-Arifi.
and we are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.